Now, South Africa celebrated the 46th anniversary of Youth Day yesterday. It's since the Soweto student uprising on June 16, 1976. Fast forward to 2020, a Statistics South Africa study reveals that 66.4% of youth are unemployed, adding that some in this group have no hope for the future. For more on the challenges faced by the youth of today, we're joined by Sthandiwe Msomi, spokesperson for the South African Youth Economic Council. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. As the country reflected on Youth Day and people went around saying Happy Youth Day, a lot of the young people in South Africa said, no, it's not a Happy Youth Day. What was your take?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mpho, for having us on the show today. Indeed, when one listens to the speech that the president delivered on Youth Day, it gives us a very big anticlimax in what we hope our country is going to do to resolve the youth unemployment crisis. And when you hear about the things that the president was lauding in his speech, such as having a big social security program in the country and feeding schemes in schools and, having more African graduates and African students in previously white institutions, it leaves one asking the question of what is the vision and the ideological direction that our country is taking. And after listening to his speech and several other comments by government officials, one really has a feeling of hopelessness and despondency in that there's no clear direction as to whether or not the state will lead growth, whether or not there'll be interventions to integrate young people into the economy, and how we're going to address the question or the situation that we face of having so many young people in this country being dependent on some form of state grant. And unfortunately, in this country, we face the legacy of apartheid and the legacy of colonization that has left many people in dire economic situations. And as a council, we believe that a country is only successful really when it gives each and every single person the ability to build a life for themselves and to contribute positively and productively into this economy. And unfortunately, the remarks and the rhetoric of the president, on Youth Day, really leave one with not much hope in terms of the actual interventions that the presidency and the government really is looking to implement in this economy.
It's more than 7 years since the hashtag Fees Must Fall protest, where young people of this country really reminded South Africa of their strength when they staged this protest against high fees at tertiary institutions. It was a good fight, but what are the gains today?
The gains really are that, the types of gains that the government has tried to achieve have been very marginal. So we've seen the Department of Higher Education receive a higher budget and more funds from National Treasury. But the fundamental questions of whether or not our education system as a whole is aligned with the majority of this population. The very fact that we can only praise the fact that there's more black graduates in the education system doesn't address the question of whether or not the fight for decolonized education was reached. It doesn't address the question of, how our education system is really going to align itself with the black masses of this country. And so to not have more universities built post-apartheid, to not have an ideological stance that says fee-free education is what we're going to give to students, not NSFAS or these cosmetic programs that we see today, that doesn't do enough. And so we're going to see ourselves continuously revisiting conversations about fees must fall and education up until really the government of the day takes a stance on making education a free public good for everyone, and also addressing how we can decolonize our education system to ensure that every black child actually sees themselves in the education system as opposed to wanting to integrate into a space that so many people still find themselves excluded from.
And young people across the country say that they fear that there is no future for them in South Africa. And at the same time, we're hearing that the jobs of today will not be the jobs of the future. So where does it leave young people in terms of their thinking and their plans for the future?
I think it first starts with what direction or type of country we want to be. And this is a question that many other countries, especially the Asian tigers like Singapore and Taiwan and Japan, asked themselves when they got independence. So we need to ask ourselves, what does South Africa want to be known for? Do we want to be the manufacturing hub of Africa? Do we want to be the most innovative country on the African continent that actually has valuable goods and services to deliver in the global market? And once we actually decide aside that, I think we will have more of a clear direction and tunnel vision as to what skills we need to focus on, what type of businesses young people should start, and how exactly we fund that. At the moment, our country seems to be deindustrializing at a very huge rate, and that is very concerning because South Africa is a country that is hugely labor intensive. And so we need to come up with industries where young people who have artisanal skills, or those who go to TVETs and even universities, can actually find ways to actually implement their skills in a sustainable way. At the moment, because we don't have a clear direction as to what our country really sees themselves being competitive in within the global market, we won't see this economy growing. And until then, I think we need to ask ourselves the very critical questions of what direction our country is taking, because that will inform our education system, that will inform our industrial policy, that will inform the nature of our politics even, because that has a huge impact on our economy and society at large. And I think it is time that young people hold the government of the day accountable, but also hold the private sector accountable as well, because there's been numerous times the president has called on a social compact and calling on private business, but it takes the hands of the state in actually legislating certain things, such as a work experience policy or a quota for young people in certain companies, to actually drive the integration of young people into the economy. And so if it's still left to the whims of the free market, or for those who feel benevolent enough to include young people, I do think that young people then have a cause to be worried and to actually stand up and say things need to change.
Sthandiwe, you are part of the South African Youth Economic Council, and as I look at your website here, that you say that you're youth-led for economic and legacy advocacy matters to promote youth and participation in integration in the economy. How much of an impact do you think you've made as a council in terms of advocating for young people in South Africa? And perhaps also, what are the challenges you've faced?
I think our council has been very critical in advocating for the participation of young people in very strategic sectors of our economy, because prior to that, I think the conversation is around education and access to education, but we also have to address the critical questions of how exactly young people are going to get involved in the mining industry, how exactly young people are going to get involved in the technology sector and these big sectors that hold huge amounts of capital, right? So our council has been critical in engaging the DMRE on programs that we can implement to ensure that youth-owned businesses that are in the energy sector actually have an opportunity to compete. When we also look at the independent power producer program that's being implemented to integrate renewable energy into our energy mix, our council has been a huge advocate for youth-owned businesses in the space to say, when bid windows open up, we want to see youth-owned businesses being given a chance to actually compete in that industry and participate in it as well. So our council has really been looking at the issues that young people face from a very, bird's eye view, and looking at how exactly we can get youth-owned businesses in sectors of this economy that are actually going to drive growth forward. Because we talk about things like the cannabis economy and other industries that are booming, but no one is really asking the critical question of where are young people going to be and what quota will be implemented to see young people in those spaces. And then our council has been very critical in actually, speaking up on that and being the voice for young people in that regard. And then in terms of the challenges that we face, I would say that our country faces a huge challenge of being heavily monopolized by big industries and big companies that make it very hard for our markets to be competitive enough for young people to actually enter the space. And often also you'll find that once you advocate for youth-owned businesses or young people in one sector, you'll find that so many departments in our country are so misaligned, and it makes it impossible to have a sustained win. So let's say you advocate for a youth-owned business to be a part of a bid window or be selected to participate in a tender, let's say, in energy. The questions of funding and capital are a huge issue that one faces in that regard, because in as much as we have developmental finance institutions, whether it's the Development Bank of SA, the IDC, and other entities, you'll often find that the inefficiencies in those entities as well make it super difficult to fund really, really credible and youth-owned businesses that have the potential to actually grow. And also you'll find that the commercial financial sector in this country is exclusionary in its very nature. If you just read statistics, you'll find that over the course of time and in recent times, banks have found ways to generate more of their revenue from creating other products other than their primary source of lending out capital into the real economy for young people or people in general to be productive and start businesses. If banks can now make more money by other alternative sources as opposed to taking a risk on a young black person who wants to start a business, why would they want to then come into the party of investing in the real economy, right? And that's another sector, another area that governments should look at and ask themselves, how can we regulate that sector to ensure that it actually performs its function of pumping capital into the economy for youth-owned businesses to then go and become renewable energy power producers, or become the next industrialists in our economy. And so those are the nuances and the complexities around the strategic sectors of our economy, that young people face. And we hope that our council can continue to advocate and lobby on behalf of young people to get those issues resolved and see young people being integrated into our economy.
Absolutely. We also hope so. Thank you so much for your time.